You started this book with an interesting claim that obedience is sort of at the core of what it means to be a person. So you started with a very big picture, rather than starting talking about marriage. You talked about obedience itself.
Yes, and that was one of the things too that I felt I needed to do because when I talked to my editor, Mary Beth Giltner, she said that she was very touched by the podcast because she received some insights that sort of affected her whole understanding of obedience, even in her mind,
Wow.
obedience in the religious life and just in the spiritual life in general. And so I realized that if I was going to do this book, while it was going to focus on the specifics of the relationship between husband and wife, because the relationship of Christ and the church is one that has been compared to a marriage, right? That we all have something to learn about obedience, specifically from the way in which a husband and wife live that dynamic. And so that's why I thought I wanted to start out in general and then kind of go into the specifics and see what insights we could gain there and kind of then pan back out again at the end.
Why is obedience so important to understanding personhood?
Yeah, I think because again, today it's become sort of a obedience, authority. Those words have become sort of like poison, sort of topic words that toxic words that sort of get a reaction from people. And I was sort of trying to analyze why. And it seems in my mind that obedience is usually associated with a lack of freedom. Obedience is contrasted to freedom. We say, oh, we think of obedience as something where your freedom is taken from you because someone else is sort of ordering you around or living for you. And I wanted to sort of examine the idea that, we do use the word obedience, with our pets, doggy obedience school. We talk
Mm-hmm.
about the planets, sort of, they obey the laws of nature. We talk about or shall I say, subhuman creatures that don't have personal spiritual abilities to understand and to choose. We use that word when we're talking about animals, but the truth is an animal can't actually disobey any more than it can obey. Animals follow
Mm.
instinct. Animals respond to stimuli. If an animal behaves badly, so to speak, we usually don't blame the animal. We blame the owner. Somehow the owner put it in a situation where something was triggered. We don't assign agency and responsibility to a non-personal creature. So it made me realize, wait a minute. Strictly speaking, non-free creatures can't obey any more than they can really disobey. We train them, we condition them, which means, well, wait a minute. If only personal creatures can obey, it seems to be something that must have some dignity. And so that sort of forced me to consider in what way does obedience express sort of the highest form of what we can do. And again, my book puts authority and submission, it looks at it through the lens of giving and receiving. Okay, and we can talk more about that as the interview goes on, but in that context, when we think about the giving and the receiving of a gift, a lot of times, even as Catholics, we talk about, oh, how noble it is to give, charity, this, that. But the truth is, there is no gift without an offering, a free offering, yes, but also a free reception. It's, it's a gift is lost if it's not it's not complete. It's not a success if it isn't freely received. And so if authority ultimately, in the best, most authentic sense, is a kind of sacrificial gift that serves the whole, then there has to be some element in obedience, which is the receiving of this thing and the disposition required for the receiver of a gift. And the ability to freely recognize when something is being offered and to freely accept it. And of course, we're humans. We know that when a gift is offered, it's not just an item. It is a relationship being offered with the other person. And so to receive a gift from another is a really big deal, actually. And only a person can do this. Only a person can recognize the significance of a gift. And only a person can freely enter into a relationship. You can't really be forced into a relationship. So that sort of was the avenue that I went down in examining the way in which obedience is actually a truly and exclusively personal act.
What's interesting about looking at the fall of Adam and Eve is that it both tells us a lot about obedience and disobedience in relationship to God, but also about the relationship between the spouses. And it seems like this problem begins with Eve's unwillingness to trust that God is a giver, that God's commands are part of His gift, rather than something that
Yes,
He's trying to take or keep from her.
exactly. That it's precisely that moment where Eve is tempted by the devil. He makes the suggestion that God, in giving them their lives, this beautiful garden, everything that surrounds them, including a commandment that is offered for their protection, because of course he says, do not eat of that tree or you will die. He suggests that no, God is not offering that for their flourishing, for their protection. He's not a giver. That won't happen. You won't die, right? He is actually trying to keep something from you in order to manipulate you. And so she has to make a choice. Do I trust God? She hasn't been given any reasons not to trust God, but that's the suggestion. Do I trust or do I doubt? And that's really the crux of the disposition that's necessary to receive a gift. It is trust. You're trusting that this other person is offering you something that is for your good, that is out of love. And in accepting it, you're accepting this relationship, this union with them. And so that disposition of trust is huge, and it's very scary. We're all very vulnerable, right? Because of course, in the human world, our trust is broken a lot, right? People have experienced their trust being broken, and it's deeply wounding to the human person. So that sort of stands at the beginning, that if you were going to have relationships, if we're going to have union, if we're going to have community between persons, it absolutely needs to be free, and therefore it requires this element of trust. And of course, we know the story that she opted to doubt and to really refuse the gift, refuse to be a receiver, and Adam, of course, joining her in that.
The other thing is that Eve's distrust of God ends up becoming sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy about her relationship with man.
Yes, and that's the thing, that she doesn't want God to control and manipulate her. She has misinterpreted his gift, which is for her flourishing. She's misinterpreted as an attempt to control and manipulate. But then unfortunately, in this new state, when Adam and Eve have basically severed themselves from God's friendship, they no longer have the vision of one another that they once had. I do spend a lot of time in the book talking about the original vision when Adam and Eve behold one another naked without shame, which is sort of a mysterious concept for us in this post-fallen world. But nonetheless, what John Paul suggests is that they're viewing one another in a sense through the eyes of God. They're so close, they're in such intimacy with God that they see what he sees, and they see one another in the full value. They see one another as God sees them. And so there's no shame. Their bodies completely reveal sort of their inner dimensions, and it's like a beautiful mutual exchange of gift of Adam and Eve, one before the other. But then, of course, the first thing that happens after they've severed themselves from God's friendship through their own choice is this new experience of the body. Suddenly they're seeing one another's bodies. Even to say, oh, I see your body, is sort of to distinguish that body from you in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a new experience. And not only are they noticing one another's bodies, they're hiding one another's bodies from each other. They're hiding with the fig leaves, and they're hiding in the bushes, actually, from God. So all of this new experience is associated with the fact that they're experiencing a new vulnerability with regard to the other. And there is a certain fear that the other might try to use or control me.
Right.
And certainly what we see in the sad history of men and women, we hear God say, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And, some people talk about that line, and I've even had over the years students debate whether that line is what they would say is descriptive. Is it describing the new dynamic between them?
Mm,
Or is it prescriptive? Is it somehow saying this is the new rule for male-female relations? And they want to
right.
connect that to wives be submissive to your husbands. And I would disagree with that. I'd say it's descriptive of what's going on between them
Right.
now. Her desire for him, her desire for union is very strong, but it's so strong that she's even tempted to allow him to objectify her. Okay, and he's going to be
Right.
tempted to rule over her in the sense that he might relate to creation as more of an object. That's not the same thing as the headship that St. Paul talks about.
Right.
So it is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that here woman in history many times has been sort of objectified, used for man's pleasure. But at the same time, it was what she was trying to avoid in the first place, and she walks right into it. So that's sort of part of the sadness of that.
We've also seen that in modern history too, like sort of like the pride of women in wanting to be liberated in a certain sense, and that actually then leads to greater objectification and greater slavery to men.
We liberate ourselves right into, I'll do anything for you. I will ruin my physical health, my psychological wholeness. I'll give away everything just so I can be free and allow you to use me and not have to commit to me. I mean, it's so sad.
Right.
But again, it goes with that desire. And that's something that I do talk about in the middle chapters of the book, the way in which woman in a particular way seeks affirmation in and through relationships. And it's not that men aren't also ordered toward relationship, but woman craving the person in a particular way. It's natural, but it's so strong that sometimes she's willing to, again, I would describe it by that line, your desire shall be for your husband. She's driven by a desire for fulfillment through relationship in such a strong way that sometimes she's willing to not actually see herself as more than an object.